Here's the ultimate thing is whether it's psilocybin containing mushrooms, whether it's LSD, it's not that these substances chemically change you to heal something. Tah is great with his medical experience to share what he saw in emergency rooms, in hospitals, but it's more like the place we can start this conversation is what do these substances open within us to see?
Hey, folks, so I can't even talk today. So what's going on? Am I high? No, I'm not. Well, today's topic is a controversial one. It is about not getting high, not getting stoned, but you might be. It's really about what side of the camp are you on? Do you think that THC, psilocybin, microdosing, and things like that are a benefit to your health or to your mental health? Or are you on the camp where you say absolutely not, this stuff is harmful, it causes more harm than it does good? Well, my guests today are going to talk about, the good. They're going to talk about really the good and the bad, the positive and negatives of this, but you're going to find out they are leaning on one side more than the other. So what do you think? Are you for, are you against, or are you on the border of this? Before we get started, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And as always, if you're a pet owner, please be responsible and have your pets spayed or neutered. Also, please remember to check out their website, condorapproach.com. All right, let's get into it.
Welcome to Amazing People, Amazing Things with your host, Chuck Tuck.
Tah and Kole Whitty. Tah, T-A-H, and Kole with a K-O-L-E.
That's right.
Yes, we like to say like tacos, then you're halfway there. So Tah is the masculine, Kole is the feminine. People flip us all the time. We still will answer. So
Hey, if they're watching it on Tuesday, it's your Taco Tuesday
right.
talk, and we're going to talk about some psychedelics.
Spicy.
Psilocybin, probably. Yeah, it's. Are we going to touch on THC a little bit?
yeah, we can. I mean, this day and age, they're all kind of getting lumped together, which can make it even more confusing of what substance when, what serves what person. So we'll kind of flow through all of it, knowing, one, we are not condoning the illegal or illicit use of anything in this conversation. We're going to share actual lived experience, actual data, and personal experience, coupled with some research, just to kind of plant that there.
Okay.
And maybe some tales from our clients,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, because I know some of the things that the two of you are really keen on talking about is how psychedelics are helping couples fall in love again, and the magic of mushrooms, shrooms, caps, buttons, whatever we want to call it. But does it help with pregnancy after 40? Because I did a little looking around, and it was saying that there are no studies, and some places are saying it's I think it helped on the male side. I can't remember exactly what it was with sperm count and things like that. And then the all-encompassing thing that I'm really curious about is, does it unlock this hidden potential in you, or are you at risk with damaging your brain cells?
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, the answer is yes and no to all of it. And, here's the ultimate thing is whether it's psilocybin containing mushrooms, whether it's LSD, it's not that these substances chemically change you to heal something. Tah is great with his medical experience to share what he saw in emergency rooms, in hospitals, but it's more like the place we can start this conversation is what do these substances open within us to see of past traumas, childhood experiences that caused so much unrest, unease that became dis-easy, that our body could no longer heal or function optimally. And these substances, we call them master teachers, can actually show and reflect back to you some of the parts and pieces that were maybe fractured or fragmented, and reintegrate some of those past selves into a more functional, optimal, vital self that can heal. So,
okay. I was wondering, Tah and Kole, what are your backgrounds? How is it that you got into this? Is there medical background? Is there, I'm going to make up a word, experiential, or is that a real word?
yeah, that's a word.
That's a word. So for me, Chuck, I've been a registered nurse for 32 years, and I practiced nursing in New York City in some of the most rambunctious hospitals you can imagine in New York City, in Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens. And I graduated from nursing school at the age of 20, and I was so heavily engulfed in trauma in my own personal life. I wanted to help people fix themselves because I saw myself as broken, and I saw everybody else as broken. And so I went to nursing school at the age of I graduated at the age of 20. I wasn't even old enough to drink. And what I saw in my childhood was I grew up in the 70s where there were gang wars in New York City, like really rough gang wars. Then in the 80s, we had crack, right? 80s and 90s, we had crack cocaine ravage New York. When I graduated from nursing school, we were at the height of HIV, and people were dying by the droves. Prostitution was up. Like, it was crazy in New York City when I was a kid. And I graduated. I went to school in my late teens, and I came across so many people that were engulfed in trauma and disease. And I didn't know what to do with myself in that space. And so I didn't know how to heal my own trauma. And I walked into hospitals and I saw bodies that were falling apart. I saw all of these really horrendous things happening to people. And I was on this mission to fix people. And I saw that the healthcare industry was moving into a position of creating repeat customers and becoming this huge conglomerate of money, of a money-making machine. And I took an oath to do no harm. And I saw that I was sending people to procedures I knew they didn't need. I was giving people medication that I knew was damaging them. And it became this really huge engulfment of shame and guilt and not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go, and doing things according to protocol and not following my humanness or supporting people in following their humanness. And that led me into a...
I was going to say, and how you're probably going to go right to it. How did that lead into the psychedelics?
Yes, I'm on my way there, and so that got me into a position where I wanted to help people stay out of the hospital because I saw what was going on in the hospital system, and I wanted to keep myself out of the system. And I got into this position where I started to get depressed. I started to get sad. I started to want to kill myself, and I started to feel suicidal. And I started to and I was lying about everything. I had a very rough childhood. I did a lot. There was a lot of fawning and trauma in my household and violence in my family, and I was doing my best to make sure that everybody was good. So I was lying to everybody. And I got into this really low point where I was in a 8-year relationship, and that relationship crashed, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And I kept saying, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And I cracked my spine lifting a patient at the hospital, and I could not walk for 3 months. I was doing personal training, trying to transition out of nursing. I couldn't train people anymore. I couldn't work as a nurse anymore. The relationship that I was in was completely crashed, and I was at the bottom of the barrel. I was at the end of my wits. And that's when Kole and I were doing fitness challenges and helping people to lose a bunch of weight, and I couldn't do that anymore. And I cracked my back, and I was drinking Jose Cuervo in my house, and I don't drink, and Kole said to me, look, you're a brilliant person. I see where you are, and I think there's something that can help you tie everything together. And I was like, well, what's that? And she's like, well, a ceremony. And I said, well, what's a ceremony? And she said, well, you sit in this room with these people, and you go in a circle, and you take these psychedelics, and you go off into this realm, and you find yourself. And I was like, oh, you want me to do some drugs with some hippie white people? I ain't doing that. And, I was terrified. And I told Kole I trusted her more than I trusted any human being in my life. And so I had my first psychedelic experience, and I was terrified that I was going to become a crackhead, right? Because I was raised in the 80s with crack. I was terrified that I was doing something bad against the law, which I was going to lose my nursing license. And it changed everything for me, Chuck. It changed the way I think about myself. It changed the way I see nursing. It changed the way I see humanity. And it changed my love for myself. And it helped me to let go of all of the things that had been keeping me stuck.
Most people end up in psychedelics out of desperation or inspiration when they hit a wall. Mm-hmm. So you can look at people like Steve Jobs, and some of these big tech guys that have said that some of their psychedelic experience is what helped them open up their creativity. And desperation is the other kind of key one. And I come from the other side of Tah, where I worked for the DARE program, Partnership for a Drug-Free America. The state of Utah gave me an award and a day of recognition for my work in educating the youth on the dangers of club drugs. And I did major talk shows like Montel Williams 20 years ago. But what I learned, Chuck, was not that we had an addiction problem, we had a trauma problem. I was getting 200 plus emails a day. And we could remove the substance, but we didn't remove the suffering, and the addiction just moved to something else. Video games, now Netflix, social media. We could say some are more functional, but then we have to ask for who. And I hit a wall like Tah did. So many chronic medical conditions that when Western medicine couldn't fix it, I was desperate and open to try anything. And that's what's really flipping the coin for more people now that were anti or had college experiences that went wrong or were just partying, is they hit a wall where they are willing to reconsider their ideas and beliefs.
Now, a couple of things. If THC, pot, and it's getting more and more widely accepted throughout the states, but it's still not. I'm going to use some words and terms that I'm not familiar with, meaning that I may be saying things wrong, but it's not federally recognized as a legal substance to use. That's one. But then when we go to psilocybin, there's still even fewer states that even allow that, which I'm not sure if there's, maybe a couple of them. Mm-hmm. But so I want to know, how is it that these folks are getting these things to use, and how is it that they aren't getting busted? I know this is kind of off topic, but I think this is something that where people are going to go, well, I want to try it, but it's not legal, so I'm afraid to. I'm afraid to even not experiment, but I'm afraid to try it to see if it's going to help me. And I think this is an important thing.
It is. And this is also why more people are going to places like Costa Rica or Peru, where there's other what they call plant medicines that are available legally. The problem is, without preparation of what actually happens in the nervous system in the mind, it can be a disintegrating experience where someone comes home. You remember those cartoons where they put all the stuff in the closet and then they go to open it and it all kind of bursts out into the room? That's kind of like what can happen if someone goes into some of these deeper plant medicine experiences in the jungles in the Amazon, is they open up the closet and it all kind of busts out and they don't know what to do with it. So now it's there, I'm aware of it, but what do I do? So more people are flocking to those kind of places, but after we've had people like Michael Pollan put out a New York Times best-selling book called How to Change Your Mind. There's been documentaries like Fantastic Fungi. There's centers like the Johns Hopkins. They opened up like a $17 million research center for cancer studies and depression studies on psilocybin. So people are seeing the research, and again, when someone gets desperate, they are less concerned in the ramifications legally if the only other alternative is I might want to die, or I feel like I'm falling apart, I'm going to fail my kids, I can't keep my business together. Desperation creates inspiration to even question some of the legal parameters. As you mentioned, federally, it is still illegal in all context, unless you are with certain centers. Now, some cities and some organizations have gotten sort of exemptions, but it doesn't really make everything legal, which makes the landscape even more confusing, even more gray. And if you look at our prison complex system, most of the people that are getting caught and not released from prison are from the Black and brown communities. So it's also, who do these things impact when people start making decisions? Because there's people out here setting up religions so that they can practice freedom of religion. Places like Texas, where we are, where they're setting up psilocybin churches, but it still only makes it defensible in court if it is a medicine or sacrament based around a religion. So, there's so much nuance that's why for us education is so important here. And you're having more clinics open up and working with ketamine, which is not technically in the psychedelic realm, but can have psychedelic effects. So people are Googling and finding ketamine, but it's really not the same thing. So there's a lot of confusing information out in the market. So it's understandable that people will almost find the information that will make them feel just good enough about some of the boundaries they might be pushing. And that's where it can also get pretty messy.
You know,
Yeah, it's, oh,
no,
go
I was gonna
ahead.
say, you know, people are going to Jamaica where you can do
It is legal.
psilocybin mushrooms in Jamaica, and people are going to Amsterdam and places overseas where these things are legal. So that's one of the things I invite people to do is research where you can go if you have the investment space. Now, a huge part of the challenge with a lot of things is people don't have the finances to travel to another country to experience mushrooms. So they're going to Joe Drug Dealer on the corner and they're getting mushrooms and they don't know what to do with it. And that's where the challenge is with people, is that they're sourcing these things from some really sketchy places. And sometimes when it's a CPR situation, anybody that's in the room that can do some kind of chest compressions is the person that you're going to go to. The thing is, we want people to get informed and get information on how to vet people, how to look for things, how to be safe in your experiences so that you know what you're doing, so that you don't get yourself jacked up.
Yeah, one mushroom. It could be the same little piece of a mushroom, but one mushroom could be 4 times stronger than another. Kind of like what's happened in the cannabis space. You can get one little tiny gummy that is power packed because it's been alchemized and it's been manipulated to be stronger. We live in a society where it's harder, faster, more now. How do we get through this faster? How do I get the biggest effect? And that is not a healthy approach to this healing work.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in, although I am not an expert in this and I have no clinical studies or anything like that, but I wanted to put out that, like you said, folks get to the point or they get desperate. They're either in desperation to try for recreation or desperation to try for something for mental health. Although there are like over 200 different types of fungi that can be in the hallucinogenic, I would say don't go out there and be an inexperienced person and pick a mushroom and think that that is the right mushroom to do the job, because it could be a poisonous or bad
100%.
mushroom.
Please don't.
Yeah, please don't do that, because they can look very, very similar. And as you said, Chuck, many of these psychoactive, because there's adaptogenic mushrooms, there's psychoactive mushrooms, the psilocybin containing being like the psychedelic, or entheogenic is my preferred usage. Many of these mushrooms grow in the United States in the wild after a rain. People that know how to forage can find them. So we're being denied access to a natural resource that is growing from the land here that's not manipulated. But that's part of the threat to big companies that cannot trademark or protect a product that someone could just grow in their house. So, it's kind of that common theme of, if you look at the research, who's funding the story, or the outcomes, even the positive ones. There's some narrative or outcome desired that's kind of driving it. So that's why for us, it's like being able to research and learning about, Mother Sabina down in Mexico, who was really the one that introduced doing work with magic mushrooms in this capacity to many of the Beatles, to many celebrities, that made it public, that made it cool. That's really kicked off a lot of the movement in the late 60s and 70s. And so knowing the indigenous practices that go with these things, that if we make it where people have to fly to Jamaica, like Tah so beautifully said, we are leaving inaccessible potentials to underserved and underrepresented communities, when in our therapy right now it's 74% white women. It's very hard for someone not in that demographic to have a safe space to heal and explore with someone that doesn't look like them, that doesn't understand their lived experience. And we're seeing that in the psychedelic space as well, is only people who can afford this type of healing are having access to it, versus so many are waking up to their indigenous roots, actually, of Africa, of different islands, that this was a part of their ancestry long before it was taken away.
Kole, can you tell us briefly what entheogenic is?
Yeah, so
Did I say it right?
yes, entheogenic. So when you think of empathy, right, when you can actually feel and connect, and we call it getting in your heart, entheogens are the ones that are really tuning in your intuition, your connection to yourself, to God, whatever that means for you. This is not teaching you one specific thing. It's when I can really understand myself and I can hold space for others, I can connect more deeply to others. We say those are more entheogenic substances, or master teachers that do that, versus say an LSD or a ketamine. And so that for psilocybin containing mushrooms, we put them in an entheogenic category, and many other substances we see in a wheel, kind of heart, mind, body, and soul. Some enter through the heart, some enter through the body. Mushrooms can kind of access all those parts. Some people have a very body experience, some have a very spiritual experience. But it's that once you enter the wheel, and we would technically kind of classify magic mushrooms as going through spirit, which is why so many people have profound spiritual experiences of talking to past loved ones, of talking to a child that moved on, that found out that they would have a baby and what the baby's name was. Like, I like to say, I grew up in Utah, in the Mormon religion, so I like to explain it as the veil can get thinner to the spiritual realms. So for me, that's more what entheogenic master teachers do.
Okay. And Tah, can you tell us maybe one of your experiences when on one of these hallucinogenic substances? What you experienced?
Yeah. So mushrooms are not necessarily hallucinogenic. They can offer visuals, but they're not always hallucinogenic. My first 2 years in psychedelics, I didn't see any visuals at all. There was a lot of connection with my body. There was a lot of connection with thought processes and all kinds of things in my life. So one of the greatest things that happened to me is I kept having this thought that came in that I was to say some very specific words out loud. And they were, "My name is Tah, and I will not be pacified." And my entire life, I had been shutting myself down and shutting myself up and not speaking in my full voice. And I kept getting this drive to say that as loud as I possibly could in the fullest voice I could, and I was terrified. And I called the facilitator and I said, I need you to get as many men in the room as possible to make sure that I don't hurt myself or hurt anybody else, because there was so much energy moving through me, I didn't know what was coming. And so she went and she got all the men in the room, and they came and they kind of surrounded me and they put their hands on me and touched me. And I screamed out loud, "My name is Tah, and I will not be pacified," in the most guttural, full voice that I could ever imagine. And that was the last day that I wore glasses. I had been wearing glasses since my childhood, and this is, I think it was 42, 43 when this happened. Right, and I'm 44. I was 44 when this happened, and I was wearing glasses, and I don't wear glasses anymore. And I had been in this position where I was told that I had something called retinitis pigmentosa, and that that I would be blind by the time I was 40, and my eyesight was closing. My periphery was just closing and closing and closing in, and my forward-facing vision was all hazy, and that's why I had to wear glasses all the time. And after I did this, that was the last time I wore glasses, and my eyesight cleared up, and I took my driver's license test, and I passed it with no glasses for the first time in my life. And I couldn't understand what was going on. When I spoke to the facilitator was like, "Look, when you go into psychedelic spaces, there are certain networks that in your brain that are associated with certain thought patterns, and they can be self-deprecating thoughts, self-limiting thoughts, self-destructive thoughts, and your body patterns itself around those thoughts on the unconscious level." And what probably happened, because she's never in a space where she's diagnosing anything. She said what probably happened is your brain, you got to separate yourself from that, and you saying that you will not be pacified changed all of the neurology in your brain around you speaking in your full voice as much as possible and being able to see yourself in a fuller spectrum. And so that allowed your body to shift gears and change into a different mode that created a newness in your body. And it was absolutely revolutionary for me, and that was a huge part of me changing my body into what it is now from what it was back then. And if you saw me 15, 20 years ago, you would not recognize me. My body looks entirely different. My face, like you were saying before we got on the call today, that you guys look different every time. People are telling me that my age is like it's reversing. And
I call him Benjamin Button.
and this is something that, when Kole first looked to introduce me to psychedelics, I was like, get out of here with that crap, right? Because I'd been so indoctrinated by the healthcare industry that this is the only way that you can heal. I now see that there are other ways that we can become whole. And there was a space in my thought patterns on an unconscious level that were keeping me from wholeness with my eyesight, wholeness with my voice, wholeness with connecting to the environment.
Fear.
And that opened me up into a completely different space of realization. But this came from, this wasn't something that I saw in visuals or hallucinations. This was something that was a deep feeling, a deep knowing within myself. And that deep knowing was probably one of the most spiritual experiences I've had in my life. And this is one of there are studies, and I can send you the studies. There are studies and on surveys that they did with people who said that psychedelics, psilocybin mushrooms, introduce people into spiritual experiences that rival that of their first child or getting married. And
As far as a
birth
peak
of their first child,
experience.
as far as peak experiences are concerned.
Well, and the promise for things like PTSD, right? Because this is one of the most studied with veterans. That's where the most funding goes to, is veterans and working with PTSD. And we've had the honor of working with veterans and military members. What these types of things afford someone by having a very heightened visual experience. Like Tah said, not everyone has a visual experience. But when you look at what could possibly happen, I really can't share anyone's personal experience, but how I could chunk this down is I had assaults on my sexuality from 8 to 12 years old. And the internalization of things that happened made me deeply ashamed with a lot of things in my life. And that kind of modeled me in my teens, at-risk youth, kicked out of 3 high schools, the textbook of I had a traumatic experience. And in a psychedelic experience, I had a guide there. Now this guide, because I was in a heightened ability to have a visual, just my imagination, not external visuals like, seeing squiggly lines or something. But in that heightened ability, I could imagine more exactly. He walked me through a process of going back to the day before those events happened. And he actually walked me through a visualization similar to a hypnotherapy session. But because of the heightened neuroplastic event, which basically just means that my brain was more malleable to taking in the information than doing hypnotherapy alone, this man walked me through step by step, going back to the day before it started, scooping up that 8-year-old me, taking me on this great adventure that we walked through, me having fun with her. And what had happened, Chuck, is in that moment when I was 8 years old, I lost my innocence, but I never knew what that would mean. It was, if I looked at all my pictures, the light in my eyes was gone. And in this psychedelic experience, when I got to the end of the experience, I realized now I had that younger version of me back, and that I would keep her safe now when other people couldn't.
Now, with Tah's experience as far as that physical change, I would imagine that folks shouldn't expect that to happen. Although some of these things will either close off some neural pathways or open neural pathways. This is just me thinking, and from hearing others, it's more of a realization of something, more so than it is a physical change. Like, oh, I was half blind and now I can see, or I couldn't walk and now I can walk. So don't expect that to happen.
100%.
Results
And the other
not
thing
typical.
that I'm getting to, You're right. The other thing too that I'm imagining though is you have to have an open mind going into it to accept this. If you go into it with a closed mind, nothing's going to happen. Right?
We like to say you have to feel safe enough with who you select to guide you. You can have resistance. That would be a healthy response for most people, to have resistance. For us, it's naming it. There's no ideal in going into it, because everyone has expectations. Everyone has what they hope to get out of it, what they expect to get out of it. They don't want to lose control. Tah went into it very resistant, but knowing nothing else was working in his life. So it was, you can go into it, just recognize that Your expectations or disappointments are the opportunity for growth.
You know, this experience that I was talking about with my eyesight happened more than 2 years after,
that was
after my first experience.
later.
And so there was a gradient of me being in spaces, having a psychedelic experience, and then doing integration work, which was helping me to release myself from these old belief systems that were keeping me limited.
The most important
And so the way I like to describe it to people is you're like a Pez dispenser, right? And you have trauma, and then you push it down, and you put another piece of trauma in, and you push it down, and you push it down, and you keep pushing it down. And what happens with psychedelics is it allows you to see the candy, pull it out, and then the next piece comes up. And then you can pull it out, and then the next piece comes up. And so as I've been chipping away and doing this work and introducing myself into this, my body was preparing itself for the next step of healing. And so psychedelics actually supported me in releasing myself from old belief structures that were keeping me limited in my healing. And so the psychedelics did not heal me. The healing is happening within myself. And so the belief structures, and this is one of the things that as a nurse, I had to really, really sink my teeth into with psychedelics, is that it's not just fixing the physical. We have an energetic structure around our beliefs and our thought processes that we are not accessing. And since we've been taught through programming not to acknowledge these things, when we're kids and when you see kids draw things, they usually draw colors around people because they usually see auras, and we see energy, and we see how the emotions work in these spaces, and we've been taught how to not access this stuff by programming. And so what psychedelics can help in is releasing the networks in your brain that hold on to those programs for a short period of time, so you can actually see, perceive, and actualize something different. And then in that space, you can make a choice to heal yourself. Because this is the thing that I really want everybody who's listening to this to pay close attention to, is psychedelics are not fixing you. Psychedelics are offering you a key to open yourself up to see how you can heal yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way of putting it. And just so folks know, this is nothing new. This has been done, talked about, especially big through the 60s, early 70s. People have heard of, was it Timothy Leary? All that stuff. So I guess for me, the way I try to understand it is it's in a more controlled way. And, you know, we hear things about now microdosing, where we didn't hear about that in the past. It was just, I'm experimenting, or I took this. So jumping over to that and talking about overdosing, can you overdose on psychedelics like a mushroom? Can you drink too much mushroom tea or eat too much magic mushroom pizza? And what is this microdosing?
Sure. You want me to go into it? Cool. So just checking, making sure, because you're looking at me. You're so beautiful.
I mean, I'm always looking at you.
I love you so much. So microdosing is a wonderful thing. And microdosing is like taking a tenth, right? A tenth of a normal dose of that would take you into a full trip, right? A full trip would be a macro dose space. So there's microdose, there's mini dose, right? There's microdose, there's threshold dose. And the threshold is when you start to actually
barely perceive
you start
it.
to feel things. A mini dose is when you feel stuff and you start to get into an experience. And a macro dose is when you're in a full-on trip, journey, ceremony, whatever you choose to call it. There's different linguistics for it. So a microdose allows you to be in a space where you still have the benefit of the neuroplasticity of a full macrodose, because psilocybin containing mushrooms, LSD, the Wachuma, which would be San Pedro, when you take these in a microdosing space where you can't really perceive it, or it's just below perception, or maybe you'll see colors a little brighter, right? When you're in that space, the brain is in a great space to release you from those old LinkedIn networking spaces. So if you wanted to release yourself from, if you were saying, oh, I'm so ugly, I'm so ugly, and it's playing in the background, on a microdose, you might be able to release yourself from that and say, you know what, I'm really pretty. I do see how pretty I am. I do see how beautiful I am. And then reprogram yourself around that newness. That neuroplasticity is still present without being in a full blown out trip where you can't see straight, where you can't function. You still may be able to work at home and do your stuff on a microdose without it being in a super altered state. That gives you a place where you can actually play with reprogramming your own brain. Right. And this is where where the wonder comes in, where it's like, okay, I'm reprogramming my own brain, or I have Kole and I'm like, hey, Kole, today I'm going to microdose and I want to be reminded that I love myself. Right. Every time you see me, and Kole will be like, hey, Tah, do you love yourself? Oh, I love myself so much. And I'm actually reprogramming myself around this pleasantness, around whatever. I've used microdosing to work on my handstands. Right. If there were places where I'm trying to do handstands and I can't find, I'll be in a space where I can't do this.
They just had an article in Forbes on improving your golf swing, the studies they've been doing.
This is the benefit of microdosing. Now, being in a full blown out trip allows you to reach entirely different spaces and access what we call the spiritual realm. And the spiritual realm is where we access all kinds of energy, raw consciousness, and all of this different information that we're not accessing. And this is why people are saying that they're seeing loved ones from the past, they're seeing aliens, they're seeing spirits, they're seeing all these different things, because we get to detach from our normal way of perception. And when we're outside of our normal space of perception, we get to experience the universe in a different way. And this is where having somebody who knows what they're doing as far as psychedelics are concerned, it's great to have a vetted person who can facilitate, or a shaman down in the jungle who knows what they're doing and knows how to help guide you through these spaces when you're safe. So that would be two different spaces.
And your question about overdosing. So this is the main thing I spoke to back in the early 2000s, because I actually ended up in a coma from a contaminated batch of a substance that, with my small frame, being 17, that's what turned me into the billboard for how dangerous substances can be. And this was a liquid. So now we're seeing that with fentanyl and kids, and it being put in marijuana and put in all these different things. The beautiful thing with magic mushrooms is you can see them exactly as they are. They're not grounded into a powder, or for me, I wouldn't be consuming anything that I wasn't a part of making, or I don't deeply trust where it came from, because the strengths are changing with psilocybin just like they did with cannabis. The weed that people grow now is not the same as it was 20, 30 years ago. And so as people alchemize and they manipulate the chemistry, they're getting stronger. And so this is why it's really important to not just get random or buy things off of Instagram. Like, it's crazy, Chuck, that now you'll get Instagram ads or Facebook ads of companies that are selling illegal substances, and yet we'll get hushed for even sharing education, and they're being sold as lollipops and gummy bears. And who are you marketing when you're selling these kinds of things? We've gotten calls from parents because the parent bought something online because they wanted to try for themselves, didn't secure it, and their 10-year-old had 2 suckers that had psilocybin or psilocin, or a manipulation of it. And so it's really important to know, in its raw material form or just dried, there is no overdosing mushrooms. That is not even possible. So there's one man who passed in 2020 named Baba Kalindi Iyi, an incredible person, mostly left out of all the conversations on mushrooms. Story for another day. His highest dose was 50 dried grams of mushrooms, because that's the most he could ever eat. So now that doesn't mean anyone should start high, but it's basically more is different. That was a cultural context. That was whole other things. But psilocybin containing mushrooms in themselves, without being in chocolates or any crazy thing, no one has ever died solely from a magic mushroom. Now, people, when they start mixing things, we're changing what's happening internally and with someone. And when you look at antidepressants that take 6 weeks to take an effect, when the research with Johns Hopkins is showing that after 1 or 2, but most of the time after 1 guided and supported psilocybin experience, people were showing even 6 months later, they were still no longer diagnosed as anxious or depressed, right? So you're talking about in one experience, someone is making a complete 360. We have no other antidepressant or way to support someone with that type of effect without the side effects. We know, looking at the statistics, that they don't work for most people.
And I want to throw in there, because like you're saying, that no one has overdosed on what we'd say is pure and natural psychedelic mushroom, a magic mushroom, or as opposed to you're taking a prescribed substance and you can overdose on it.
Yes.
So I want people to be aware of that, is where you've got something natural that a lot of people are saying you're going to OD and you're going to die from it, you're going to be addicted, blah, blah, blah. Go for this where the doctor is prescribed it. Well, you know what? You hear a lot of people getting hooked on prescription medicine, and you also hear people dying. So that's just for me to say, so people don't think that because a doctor prescribed it, that you're not going to OD from it.
Correct.
Agreed.
So
I'd like to say something to add on to that, Chuck.
Yeah.
As a registered nurse working in New York City, I have never seen or heard of anyone overdosing on mushrooms, LSD, or cannabis. Never. Never, 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 never. Not once. And I've had people come in with their heart racing from cannabis. I've had people come in flushed out from Molly, MDMA, ecstasy. I've never had anybody overdose on mushrooms. Never once. And there are no super toxic levels and all of this stuff. And people say that, there are studies now that if you have mushrooms and there's things that are floating around that you want to get out of your system, it has no detrimental or deleterious effect long term on a human body. Not from the studies that I've done or the work that I've been in nursing. Not once.
Yeah, and like you were saying,
imagine.
with prescriptions, and now we're not saying prescriptions are bad or demonizing them. We see them just like if someone breaks an arm, it can be a cast supportive system while a certain part of you heals. A traumatic loss, you can't function because of something that's happened, but it's meant to be a short-term fix. And now we have more and more clients that have come to us who have been on SSRI since their teens that are having such significant liver and kidney issues because these were not substances designed for long-term. But people go in, the doctor's quick to prescribe, but not really, most are not skilled in how does someone wean off of them again. So it's just like those are not a quick fix. These master teachers are not a quick fix, but with integration, with preparation, someone could have as powerful of transformational experiences with cannabis with the same type of support container and guidance. We call it set and setting. We call it intention. And how to really find the right place and space for you requires radical self-responsibility and not giving your power to any doctor, any shaman, but trusting yourself enough to choose a guide or support to walk you on your unique path.
I just want to make a comment and then a question. Going back to what Tah, what you're talking about between microdosing and a full dose. The way I imagine this is on that microdosing. It's working in the background. If I'm working on a project, it allows me to be a little bit more creative. I'm opened up. But if I'm on that full trip, I'll just call a trip a full dose and a full trip. I'm seeing. Or I'm looking at something beyond. I'm thinking in a different dimension. I'm looking at different geometric shapes, and it really opens my mind up to full-blown creativity. So that's how I imagine it. I don't know if that's true or not. I may have to go out and try it. But the other thing that I have a quick question about for either one of you is, if it's somebody new, take me for an example. I'm a new person, and I want to try this. Should I do it in a controlled substance, meaning that I should have somebody there who is either experienced or maybe not experienced, but somebody who is not partaking to be alert as to what I'm doing?
Yeah, one of the things we teach at the Condor Approach, which is our psychedelic informed program, is there are different levels of people that can hold space for you. And a holding space is the act of holding space is the skilled act of witnessing another person, their experience of themselves or whatever's happening around them. And we have different levels, and the foundational level would be the trip sitter. And this would be a person who is there to sit the trip. You go on your trip, they will hold space for you. They'll walk you to the bathroom if you need to get up. They can make sure you don't bump your head or anything. They make sure the area is clear, that there's no candles lit or getting knocked over or anything like that. They're sitting the trip, and they're not involving themselves in your trip other than keeping you safe and holding space for you in that way. Then there's a space holder where that person may be able to find out what your intention is, and if you start to go into different spaces, they may be able to bring you back into, hey, listen, I just want to bring you back to your intention. Is your intention still the same, and bringing you back to that? The next base up would be a journey facilitator. And this is a person who is facilitating, who's actually adept at going into psychedelic experiences themselves. They probably have a lot of experience in psychedelics. So if they see things coming up, they can guide you back into yourselves by asking very reflective questions for you. And they do an intake process on you. They ask you questions about what your intention is. What do you want to experience? Have you ever experienced these things before? What's your health status like? And so on. And what's your family trauma dynamics? What's your trauma dynamics? So that if stuff comes up, they can just swing you back into yourself. Those are the 3 levels of trip sitting. The next space we have what we call a psychedelic Sherpa. And a psychedelic Sherpa is someone who actually takes a substance with you and sits with you in the experience so that they can actually ride the energetic wave that you're on and ask deeper questions because they're experiencing an energetic field that is in comparison to what you're on.
But we have lots of red flags with those. So
Lots of red flags. And usually with a psychedelic Sherpa, they will hire a trip sitter to sit the trip in case something goes awry with them as an individual. Because psychedelics, if a person goes into an experience, sometimes it's potluck, right? And no matter how much experience you have. So these are different levels. And we have a thing that we offer to people called red flags, which is kind of vetting people to support you in these experiences, to ask the right questions so that you know how to find a guide that's actually going to be able to support you.
there's now starting to be more, I would say, consultants that will do virtual Zooms so that if we were a married couple, they're teaching one partner how to hold space. Because the most important factor in all of this is how safe someone feels with the person and in the environment. Some people feel safest with a doctor, so an in-clinic ketamine session may be the best thing because they've got some pre-existing conditions and some concerns. For others that have had medical trauma, being in a medical office does not work for them. So they may see ketamine telemedicine that sends to your house, but you can hire a psychedelic coach, which is what we train, whether they're life coaches or therapists, to be a consultant for you to assess, to do a self-intake process. Are you, from this data, a good candidate to do it alone? One of my favorite ways to test that is actually training in an ice bath first. How do you manage the discomfort of an ice bath? Can you breathe through the discomfort of that initial cold? Can you stay there for a full 2 minutes? Because psychedelics can be very destabilizing. And so if the body gets overwhelmed and people panic, that's where the problems start. So by doing things like ice baths, you can test, how am I under stress and overwhelming sensation? Can I breathe? Can I remember I am safe even in this peak experience? And I've told people many times, if I was going to train before going to even somewhere like Costa Rica to work with ayahuasca, breath work, meditation, ice baths, just as a general practice, because you're learning to return to the breath when you are overwhelmed, which are the only really 2 things that if that's all you have, you can return back to reminding yourself you're safe in overwhelm. So it's how well do you do in overwhelming emotions? Can you hold space for yourself? Do you know how to ask for help? That self-awareness is really important when it comes to the safety. And quite often someone will feel safer with someone with very little experience, but someone that they can talk to, that they can talk about it ahead of time. We call it a what happens when. If I do get uncomfortable or panic, what do we do? How do we handle this? So that we, just like we do that in our relationship now, people somehow come to psychedelics abandoning the things they already know that already worked. Look at your life. In the times of overwhelm, would returning to prayer feel good to you if you're Christian? Start your ceremony with a prayer. Ask God to stand with you. Call in your parents or your grandparents to be there as guides. This is what we call set and setting, which is a key component. Someone may have 20 plus years of experience as a guide. That does not mean they're safe for you.
Okay. Comment, insight, and question again. The one thing that I'm just now really realizing with what you just said, Kole, is being able to breathe. And it seems like with almost everything, that breath is very important for control. Control your breath, you control pretty much the outcome. That's one, just something that dawned on me with you talking about that. The other is Condor, your organization, and forgive me if I call it an organization or institute. So how can people find you to find out more information and to get help from what you do?
You know, we like to preface that. So we do live events because we find that to teach these things, we actually do ice baths there to teach people to titrate, to breathe. Because we can't do, and we wouldn't, even if we could in the state of Texas, we do not do any psychedelics or any we have psychoactive, but those are legal. We don't have any psychedelic or illegal substances whatsoever, and we actually restrict them. What we do at our live events is we're teaching through other methods, things like an ice bath, how in observing someone, you can see what we call a logic ceiling, which I usually have a little thing here, but it's basically when you get activated and you shut down, you cannot let information in. When someone gets in an ice bath, you're not going to be able to, at least that first minute, you're not going to be having a deep conversation because they've collapsed to their instinctual level of survival. So we can teach through other methods, not just for psychedelics, any peak experience, a car accident, having a baby, something like having a baby. We've worked in psychedelic experiences where women, their body, it's not that they're having, what is it called? The depression after...
Postpartum
Thank
depression.
you. When someone's having postpartum depression, how often it was actually a mourning of the past self. So we're talking about deaths of self and rebirth and transformation, not only through psychedelics, but in life. When someone retires from their job and their identity was that job. Psychedelics can talk about an ego death where who you thought you were dies. And there can be a mourning process. So at our live events, we're talking about the 5 different layers of logic between our body, our mind, our emotions, our beliefs and constructs, the spiritual levels, how to guide yourself, hold space for yourself, how to do that for others. So if someone's in a leadership role, whether in their family, their church, their community, knowing how to communicate effectively, or all the things that we teach. That's why we call it a psychedelic informed training. You will absolutely meet shaman and medicine carriers and therapists and ketamine clinicians at our events because they're the ones dedicated to really understanding this work. But that anyone can go to condorapproach.com or on Instagram, see our videos, see what we're about, because for us, we don't want accessibility to healing to be gatekept. And now we can't determine what the government does or doesn't do. We know that when people become desperate, we want to make sure they have information. We want to make sure that more therapists whose clients are going in and experimenting on their own, that the therapist knows how to coach them and support them through this process that is a destabilizing process that isn't like regular talk therapy. And for us, that's something that is our deepest commitment because we work with a very diverse community from age, race, religion, gender, I mean, you name it, which means that things come up. Our place is not a place to come get healing, it's to learn how to support it.
Okay. So condorapproach.com is where they could go. Okay. The other thing, too, is we just talked about breath control and the ice bath, like you mentioned. And I just started thinking, well, you know what? I kind of do something or had done something similar to that, but not an ice bath. And it was really to control my breathing. It's you take in the morning when you get up, and for those of you who have ice cold water and you splash it on your face, your immediate reflex is to breathe in. So I started just doing that cold water and tried to control and tell myself don't breathe in. So it sounds like that might be something similar for some folks who say, I don't want to jump in a bath full of ice cubes.
I don't know if anybody really wants to.
Darn, I was going to go try it, but I'm glad you said that.
No, it's actually, even with ice baths, you want to, when you can have someone that really understands, you can repattern your reactivity your anxiety. It lowers inflammation. There's so many incredible benefits. There's a company called Sherpa Breath and Cold that actually teaches about the process and what's happening neurologically and physiologically. When I feel very, very anxious and nearing overwhelm, when I get into an ice bath, it's almost like it breaks this tornado effect happening in my brain and I can't sleep, because it's like it cuts through the spinning thoughts because I can't think that first minute getting in the cold. And it's not about fighting to stay in the cold. It's about meeting the cold, being with it, and relaxing into it, not fighting it, because that's the symbol of life. That if I can surrender to the cold of life sometimes and just be in it, knowing I can't change it, knowing that it's hard sometimes, there's a psychological effect because of that physical experience.
You know, you had said something a few minutes ago, Chuck, in regards to control. And with all of these experiences, one of the things that I learned the most is that control is an illusion, right? We can influence things. And we influence things. When we influence things, we become connected and intimate with these things. And becoming intimate with the cold, becoming intimate with your thoughts, becoming intimate with your discomfort is a space that we can open into, creating a new relationship. And that new relationship creates a new dynamic where the body has to formulate itself around that new dynamic, and we heal into a new space. This is something that psychedelics has shown me. This is something that cold exposure has showed me. This is something that being in uncomfortable conversations with my family members around the traumatic circumstances of my childhood has shown me. And this is the thing that we're showing people around psychedelics, is how to create intimacy with yourself first and foremost, all of your inner workings, all of your inner thoughts and sensations and emotions. Then you move to the people that are closest to you, the environment around you, and you become integrated. Because that's what we're teaching. We're teaching integration. And I am here to influence outside and let the outside influence me. Influence, and then we become integrated together. That is influence, as opposed to control, which is an attachment dynamic where I'm trying to make something happen a certain way and not letting the other thing influence the dynamic as well.
When therapists come to our training, the physical component that we bring and having the schematics to actually see diagrams, then we're demystifying emotions. We're demystifying what do you do when someone's overwhelmed, and help people identify and really string together what they already know into systems and tools that make sense. When therapists come after 3 days, they say, I learned more about how to work with my patients than I learned in all of my school training. Because we teach someone how to be with someone, not diagnose them. How do you help create a safe container so that they can share openly and more honestly, so that they can understand and have reflected back to them their internal environment and what they want. And it's something that we're passionate about, that psychedelics helped me see certain parts of myself that people might have told me about, but I didn't believe it. Someone can say you're great, but in these types of experiences, when you're shown the moments of kindness you've offered to others and you can turn that in on yourself, it changes you. It's like the difference of someone telling you you're beautiful and then having a mirror and believing it. And so there wasn't any other way I could have gotten to where I am. People will say, yeah, you can meditate to get there. It's different. It's a beautiful tool. But for me, I had so much trauma and so many experiences that closed me so tightly to the world, that showed up as fibromyalgia, endometriosis, thyroid conditions. I was really experiencing all the pain I refused to feel in my emotions through my physical body. And it was psychedelics that helped me unwind, to understand, to relax again, and even receive love. This relationship 15 years ago never would have worked, and we're 11 years in, because we learned how to speak honestly, how to hold space for big emotions, to not self-sabotage a beautiful thing, which is why at 41 and 52, we're now entering having our first baby together.
That's right.
But I could not have done it without the other work, because in my 20s, there's no way I would have even had the fertility to do it because of how significant my health conditions were.
And, you know, the trauma that I had around children, around being a parent, around kids being, these bad kids over here. I didn't want kids, right? I have a daughter. Like, my daughter is 33, and like, she was born when I turned 18, and like, I was completely anti bringing another person onto this planet, and I had so much shame dynamics that I pushed out into the world. This terrible, I don't want to bring another child into this terrible world.
Hearing screaming kids.
I don't want to bring a child into this world to be subjected to the things that I was subjected to. And so the psychedelics helped me to reframe and remove the projection of shame outwardly to other human beings and to the planet, and to know that I am capable of bringing a child up in a really awesome way with an awesome partner. That changed my dynamic. It changed our relationship, and it changed everything. So I'm excited.
And that's why we get married every year instead of renew vows, because we're ever changing people.
Nice. So is part of this how psychedelics can help couples fall in love again? I mean, you two don't need to fall in love again. You're
we never
constantly in love with each other. I see you two. Look, there you did again. You just look at each other. Are you looking at? Yeah, I'm looking at you, of course. But, does it open up something that allows couples to fall in love again? Because people do fall out of love, and then they're together. They're out of just, I don't want to say habit, but they're just there.
Yeah.
And they need to, I feel that people need to find a way to fall in love again, whether it's on a regular basis, whether it's annually or whatever. I think if there's something that can help.
I don't think people fall out of love. I think they get buried in hurt. And so they can't see it anymore. And then they get so much frustration and resentment that it's just too much of a burden to bear. And the resentment becomes stronger than the love ever was. And so for us, for a while, we were working specifically with couples, and what psychedelic experiences can afford is the opportunity to have the dialogue, that the things that have gone unsaid, to get back in alignment. We say to lean back in and align, because what happens is people over time, it's 1 degree of separation, but as the years go on, you're so far from where you started that you're not the same person that you were. So it's not that you lost the love, you don't even know who you're married to anymore. And some people are willing to be brave enough to recognize, even if they're 5 degrees off, they're like, nope, we are not going to unconsciously uncouple. We have helped couples consciously uncouple with love, because they recognize they're different people now. But what this is when you can go into something like a magic mushroom at a lower dose so that you can still verbalize and communicate, is first you can take some time to process some things, envision what you really want in a relationship, and then you come together to say, can we get aligned here? We have mediated for couples with substance and without throughout the last 15 years. And the truth is, under the psychedelic effect, especially something like MDMA, which is what used to be used for therapy and has starting to make a comeback, is it releases serotonin. It helps people feel love again so that they can see this person for whether who they were or who they are. And are people brave enough to have the conversations? Again, the substance is not what opens someone's and just changes everything. It opens people to possibility, and in that possibility, we can have such an honest conversation that the impact of the psychedelic is, it's like doing it 1,000 times, but you did it in 6 hours, in how it implants in your brain of what you want. To remember patience, to let go of the resistance, to let go of the hurt or the anger or the fear, or maybe we need to write a letter, or maybe we need to start a new marriage. There's ways to create meaning making and rituals, and then what do we do from here so that a couple can create a relationship they want to have. It's less about falling in love. It's more about cleaning up where we got messy, where we got a little lazy, where we got a little complacent, and with someone that is willing to be brave, because it is uncomfortable. But if you just cut your losses and start in a new relationship and don't understand what parts of you fed into that dysfunction, you're going to take those bags with you.
Yeah. Tah and Kole, briefly, what is one thing about psychedelics that you would like people to know? If you could take that individually and let the audience know.
I'll say, in being in and out of this world in the last pretty much 25 years, that if you show up as a patient, you'll get a doctor. If you show up as a student, you'll get a teacher. And for me, these are master teachers. Think of it like any relationship. If you come to take, if you come to use, if you come to abuse, that is what will be reciprocated.
Very.
The thing that I'd love to share is that through the most profound thing I've learned through psychedelic experiences is that we come into this world actually knowing everything that we need to know. But through society and programming and conditioning, we have been taught how to meticulously and intricately talk ourselves out of that knowing. And psychedelics have allowed me to step outside of my programming for short periods of time to actually see that I know what I need. I know the love that I need. I know the connectivity that I need. I know what safety is for me on a foundational level, and I can connect with that. And in being able to disconnect myself from programming for short periods of time, I mean, we live in a society, right? We live in societies, and there are rules and all of these things in society. But to be able to step outside the box for short periods of time, take a look at how I want to help reshape the box and influence the box has been my greatest takeaway from psychedelic experiences. To let go of my programming for short periods of time and reprogram myself. That has been the greatest gift in my life other than this human being right here. And she is the one who brought me into psychedelics. So that's what I have to offer. Please lean into your knowing, family. Everybody who's listening here, Chuck, everybody who's listening, please lean into your knowing. You are a part of source. You're a part of something greater than you could ever imagine. And that greatness is something that I kept small for a long period of time. And when I learned to step outside of the box and expand and show the fullness of my experience and my human beingness, I have been able to influence and support people in their greatness coming up and out.
We need more people out doing the mission they feel the call in their heart, and many aren't because they're afraid what people will think, or they feel like an imposter, or they don't want their to look egoic or whatever. All of those are woundings that are keeping you from your path, your purpose, what you're here to do. And if there's any way that we can help anyone to step fully in what they are here to do, with psychedelics or without, that's what we're here for. So thank you, Chuck, for being in your mission and sharing stories, and for your time. As soon as after our meeting with you, you were the first person I booked with. I was like, oh, we're going to see Chuck. Yeah.
And thank you for that, Chuck.
I felt the same with the two of you. So I want to say Tah, Kole, Taco.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Appreciate you, fam.
All right, let me ask, was that okay for the two of you?
It was great.
Gosh, so good.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm going to hit the stop record.